here are some common wholesale myths that I hear quite a lot. And, with wholesale, it's kind of like Amazon in general. There's very different ways to approach the wholesale business model. And the first myth that people come into is, or I hear quite a bit, is that it requires a lot of working capital to get into wholesale. Now, if you're wanting to buy direct from Mattel, yeah, you're going to need a lot of capital. You need to buy a lot of product. But for most of us, that isn't where we start. You're going to be dealing with what I call low-hanging fruit distributors. And what that means is they are people who buy from the brand owner directly in large quantities and then sell them to you and I in smaller quantities for a bit of a markup. They're a middleman. Now, the downside to that, of course, is you aren't going to get as good pricing as if you bought direct from the brand owner yourself, but the upside is you can often place orders for less than $150 minimum. So it means that you can get started right away, even if your budget's limited, and you can use it, as I mentioned earlier, to get ungated in some of those brands and restricted categories, which allows you to scale your business that much more quickly. The other myth I hear quite frequently is that no one's taking on Amazon sellers anymore, and that's certainly getting to be a little more true, but the good news is there are so many brands out there, and so many brands that still don't understand Amazon, that as you get experienced after you've dealt with some of the low-hanging fruit wholesalers, the ones that'll take anyone on, the distributors, you get a lot of experience so you can start going into brand owners and small business owners and showing them how working with you as a third-party seller is hugely advantageous to them and their business, and how you can help them monitor sales and customer feedback and become what I call their brand ambassador. Another thing I hear all the time is there's way too much competition with wholesale. Well, that's because you're doing it wrong, okay? It's like arbitrage. You hear about people crying all the time in Facebook groups saying, what's with all these new sellers racing to the bottom? There's no profit anymore. It's so hard. Why do they lower their prices so low? And I'm sorry, but if you're just going out and buying a product and listing it and competing with 30, 40, 50 other sellers for the exact same product, you're not really adding a lot of value to the process. You're just a reseller. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting started and doing this. That's what I did, and you can make good money doing it. But you know what? It's becoming a lot more competitive to do that. And the spread between arbitrage things bought with from a retailer and what they're selling for on Amazon is closing. Where I used to see 150 to 200% ROIs, a lot of people are lucky if they can get 100% ROI on arbitrage now. In fact, 50% ROI is pretty typical, or even less. And so then arbitrage requires volume and a lot more capital to be able to make a decent living off of Amazon. And I just don't like that model. But wholesale, if you're just buying from a wholesaler and you're competing with a wholesaler that supplies to everybody, yeah, you're going to run the same scenario. There's going to be competition. So you have to be strategic. And one of the ways new sellers are strategic and are able to create massive products and very limited competition is by creating their own bundles. And that simply means combining a product from a wholesaler or several products from a wholesaler or wholesalers and blending them together so they're complementary items that go together. So for example, instead of selling a toothbrush, maybe you sell a traveler's kit with a toothbrush, toothpaste, and mouthwash. And we get into that in our bundling section here. So again, there is too much competition if you're doing it wrong. And that should tell you something. That follows the suit of no profit. Same thing, if you can't make a profit and everyone's racing to the bottom, if you're just adding an item and trying to list it and share the buy box, that strategy is becoming increasingly difficult in 2019 and beyond. So you really need to diversify out of that, which I'm going to teach you. Some people think they need to register to have a corporation, and while it definitely helps to be incorporated because it makes you look more professional, you can start out buying from wholesalers as a sole proprietor and using a personal credit card if need be to place orders. And then the last one is people think, well, to do wholesale, I need a warehouse. Well, you don't. You can use prep companies and then Amazon FBA service warehouse it for you. In fact, I recommend you don't have a warehouse. The costs of buying, renting one, the insurance, just not worth it. And certainly not something I would ever pursue and never have had to pursue. So, as I mentioned, you can start with as little as $150 with wholesale. So it doesn't require a ton of capital. There's a ton of Amazon seller-friendly vendors out there, especially small businesses, so don't get discouraged. What you do need to understand, though, is that wholesale is a high rate of rejection. You're going to call up 80 customers, and out of those 80 customers, maybe 5 of them approve you, and out of those 5, maybe 1 or 2 are decent accounts, right? So it's a numbers game, and there's software, and you can use VAs to help narrow down wholesale suppliers for you. Or, lucky you, you're a member of this academy. I have over 300 wholesale contacts in our Wholesale Truth Facebook group that you can access right now. So you can get a head start on most people scrimping and searching for wholesale suppliers by just going to that Facebook group. There's less competition than arbitrage if you do it right. So for example, with arbitrage, you've got people searching for products using tools like Tactical Arbitrage or Zen Arbitrage. There's a few others out there. And chances are, if they're just using that software out of the gate, they're coming across the same sales that hundreds of other sellers are coming across. So when they find these deals, they look like great opportunities to make a profit, but then you have 400 sellers all buying the same thing. Guess what happens? The price tanks. With wholesale, it takes more work to register for an account and order from a wholesaler, so you're going to have less competition overall. You can also negotiate exclusive deals with wholesalers, which is a big plus because you can be the only seller on Amazon, and you can work with them to boot off unauthorized sellers. Profits in wholesale, especially as you get into larger volume, they're not as high as arbitrage, but with volume, you're going to make up for it. Now, what that means is instead of spending all day searching for products, you're just placing an order for 1,000 units of a one SKU, and if that product's selling on Amazon, you rinse and repeat. And, you only need one good wholesale account that could literally transform your business from a part-time income to full-time. Is it hard to get to that level? Yes, it can be, depending on your own experience and business background, but it's entirely possible with a lot of hard work and knowing how to approach it. And then, of course, you can use prep and ship companies or even a storage locker to temporarily store items that you then send on to Amazon. So you can get started today as a small seller with a sole proprietorship and a personal credit card and as little as $150. Now, when you think about retail arbitrage, a lot of people think it's highly profitable, but if you start breaking down all of the things that retail arbitrage requires, or online arbitrage for that matter, if you're doing it yourself and shipping to your home, you've got to consider there's the cost of your time. You're spending hours each day scouring stores physically or going into stores online and looking for profitable products. And even using automation software tools like Tactical Arbitrage, you still have to set up those searches and then analyze all that data. Chances are you're having to de-sticker and label items yourself when you're starting out, drive to and from the stores, go around the store scanning items, putting them in your cart, lining up at the cash register, loading them back up in your car, driving back home, buying all the packaging materials and boxes and labels you need to send them over to Amazon, not to mention all the fuel costs and wear and tear on your vehicle. So when you add all those things up and subtract that from your so-called profits with arbitrage, especially as a new seller and an average seller, you're probably not selling that much volume. If you average it out to an hourly wage, you're probably making less than minimum wage when you factor in all those things. So it's just something to think about. That 100% ROI shrinks pretty quickly when you start tacking all these in. By the way, the subscription services like Tactical Arbitrage, you're looking at another $150 a month in some cases to use that software, and that all eats into your profit, especially if you're selling low volume. And then another thing to think about is, what if you get sick or injured? Well, your cash flow dries up, because if you're not out there sourcing and labeling and shipping, you don't have any shelves that are stocked and you start losing money. So something to think about.